Good morning, or in my case, good afternoon to myself, I guess. Good morning to you, Josh. It's great to be joined by you from the other coast, the equally good coast, this day.
Good morning. Yeah, I'm
How
excited.
has, yes, I'm excited too. How has your Monday been so far? I know that it's a holiday in your household, or at least you're getting a day off, or people are moving about differently than they would on a typical Monday. Is that right?
Yeah. It's LA Unified School District holiday today. So, but my daughter, I have a 7-year-old who's in second grade, and so she has the day off. So I took the day off. But my almost 1-year-old should be one this weekend. She goes to the daycare here at Loyola Marymount University, and so I dropped her off and ran to my office, and hopefully nobody will knock on my door asking me for help. But because I'm officially off today. So although I do teach tonight, so
Okay,
I
so
will
the week
be.
will
Yeah.
you'll hit the ground running shortly. But that's so funny. I can imagine as a professor, anytime someone sees your face, like, oh, an opportunity to ask a question or get a clarification. So here's hoping, but no worries if we have some visitors. That'll keep things interesting. And I'm
Wonderful.
sure this doesn't apply for the near 1-year-old kiddo, but for the other one, do they recognize that like a Monday off is a special weird thing, or for them, is it just a continuation of the weekend?
Oh yeah. No, she's been talking about it all week. Like even I think on Thursday or Friday, she was so excited about TV day, she called it, because like, well, I'm gonna be around. We're gonna try to do some other stuff, but she looks for any chance she can for screen time. The pandemic opened that Pandora's box of screen time with my wife and I both working from home, and it was hard to keep the kiddos occupied. So now
Certainly.
she's addicted to TV. So
Oh my gosh, that'll do it. But I get it. And I fully embrace Mondays off as TV time. I just before we got on here finished watching Legally Blonde, which I haven't watched in about a
mm,
decade. And it's heartwarming. It's necessary to have those little creature comforts. I think that's a good thing. But for anyone who has not met you before and is just joining in now for the first time, this is Josh Morgan, animation technical services engineer and senior lecturer. I'm really excited to unpack that with you today, and really grateful that you would take the time to chat with me.
sure. Yeah. No, I'm super excited.
So I'd love to start with your childhood, go back in time a little bit. What were you like growing up? When did these interests and these worlds kind of start to become part of your purview? Um, let's go there, if you will.
Sure. I mean, I was a really quiet kid. Like I didn't really cry. My parents actually thought something was wrong with me. Like early on, they had me tested because I was very quiet, which very shy. And anyone who knows me now kind of is like, what? Really? How is that possible? I think I took a little while to find my confidence, I guess, in my voice. And I was big into video games. My dad bought an Atari 2600, the old sort of wood-looking paneled version, which we ended up playing so much we broke it, and ended up with they came up with a new version that was all futuristic and gray and sleek, low profile,
Hmm.
and so it was one of the early at-home consoles, and I think very early on I got addicted to that thing, and got a Nintendo. And then a Super Nintendo actually had a whole thing where my parents were very much against the Super Nintendo. They were like, well, if you got a Nintendo, what's wrong with it? And I'm like, but mom and dad, it's super, to the point where I literally coordinated with my friends to say, don't get me any small thing. Like, let's all pool our money together and get a Super Nintendo. And so my parents were very upset about that for a long time. And then yeah, it for me, video games, just the immersive experience, the interactive experience, and the fact that I was big into RPGs, and the fact that you could sort of guide the narrative yourself through the choices that you make while playing the games, to me just was really uh, engaging, rewarding, and ultimately addictive to the point where when I got to college, I ended up at one point having to give up video games altogether, sort of cold turkey.
Mm.
um, where yeah, I had a moment where my roommates, I had been up all night. I didn't realize I'd been up all night playing video games, and my roommates came in and said, "Hey, Josh, weren't you saying you had a test you had to take?" And I realized, oh no, I was supposed to be studying, and I didn't. I was playing video games. So that was
Ah,
when I realized I was like, I did fine on the test. Actually, it turns out I'm pretty good at test taking, but
thank
but
goodness.
I gave up video games altogether. And then I don't know, I'm jumping way ahead. That was probably way beyond
Yep,
childhood, but
whatever you want.
that as a through line, then I ended up in grad school for animation. And that actually was kind of a series of coincidences. I knew very early on, I was also a between video games and movies and music, just consuming content that way. I was big into, I was in a band. My mom directed the tone chimes. There was like these sort of bell or bar shaped chime things with a mallet in between, and we did that in church. I did
Wow.
puppetry in church, sang in a bunch of different groups, was in a band, played bass in a band. My brother and I, he played drums. I lost the coin toss, and so he won the coin toss and got to play drums. So I picked bass, and it turns out everybody wants to play guitar. So my brother and I kind of were the local roving drummer and bassist to
That's
a bunch of
perfect.
stuff. I played in a frat band in college, even though I was not in the frat. But then, and music in particular was something that was really interesting to me. And then music videos. I wanted to for a while be a filmmaker, and for me, music videos seemed like a really good avenue to do that. There were a bunch of music video directors that I had been sort of following in the early days of the internet. David Fincher, Michel Gondry, Spike Jonze, that had sort of upgraded from music video directors to feature directors. So I had kind of thought that would be a path for me,
Mhm.
and was applying I went to UCLA for undergrad. My three best friends and I, we all went through elementary school, middle school, high school, and then we all went to UCLA together.
No
And
way.
and all three of them are programmers. They're all computer scientists, and I kind of wanted to make music videos and possibly video games. But for me, video games wasn't really. I didn't really see that as a possible career path early on, because in those days, video games there was a bit of gatekeeping. There was a bit of cost prohibitive sort of structures that video games came from big studios. You needed a lot of technical know-how, and a lot of resources. Video games tend to be, at least in the early days, were made by giant teams of people. The indie scene hadn't really blown up that much yet, where independent people were making video games. So when I was in college, I wanted to make movies, and then when I got to grad school, I was applying to grad schools, and I was applying to the live action film program at UCLA, and realized that the deadline for the animation program was 3 months later than the deadline for the live action program. And so I realized that the idea that I had for my portfolio submission, the storyboards that I was doing and the script that I had written, it actually had sort of a visual effects component to it. I'd always been really interested in visual effects. Jurassic Park in particular was a very formative experience for me, seeing, having come from the puppetry background. I really wanted to do for a while animatronics, and the fact that Jurassic Park sort of bridged animatronics and computer graphics at that time, that was really sort of that convergence, and showing that, you could tell amazing stories and do amazing, fantastical things with animation. That when I realized, it was part laziness and also part realizing that my ideas already very much sort of touch the peripheral of animation, at least in terms of visual effects. So I basically just pivoted and made my portfolio submission completely animated in its conception. And then and I had asked I asked a bunch of my professors at UCLA to write letters for me to the grad program, and it turned out that one of them, I had no idea, but one of my professors, Jutta Landa, in the German program, I was a German minor, and she said, "Sure, I'll write a letter to my husband, the chair of the animation program." And so I got a chance to meet Dan McLaughlin, and right away he was just like sort of took me under his wing, and I had an in to the program that I was not at all expecting, and to the point where I actually had very much, when I joined the program, I didn't really have much animation experience myself. I'd done a little stop motion with like puppets, or not only puppets even. I think one of my best friends had Jake and Elwood Blues Brothers dolls that we did a bunch of anime. They were, because they were semi-posable, so we were able to kind of
Oh
keep
my
them
gosh.
in positions and do stop motion that way. But I had very much sort of imposter syndrome when I joined the program, because I mean, I guess I consider myself an artist at that point where I can draw, I can paint, but it takes me a very, very, very long time. And it wasn't until about a decade ago that I realized that I kind of have what I guess among artists would be considered a bit of a disability, in that I have what's called aphantasia, where I don't have a mind's eye. If I close my eyes and somebody tells me to picture something, picture a pink dragon, like I don't really see anything. I have a mind's ear. I can close my eyes and I can hear music. I can hear a song, but for some reason I don't have a mind's eye. And apparently it's um general it's there's a small population of people just in general that have it and don't really realize it. Apparently artists, when you're, you know, it's such a being able to visualize in your mind's eye is a huge part of the creative process for visual artists. It was something that it wasn't really until I got to grad school and was talking to my classmates who were these amazing artists, people who draw all the time, and realizing, oh yeah, when I close my eyes, I don't see all those things that y'all see, and that kind of added, I think, a little bit to my imposter syndrome. It took a little while to find. Well, I guess I've always had kind of, I don't know if coping mechanisms is the right way, but I still have a very vivid imagination. I mean, I'm a lucid dreamer. I still have sort of, I still have an imagination. But for me, when I close my eyes and I imagine things, instead of um, instead of, you know, visualizing what I'm thinking about, I think my ideas come from more of like an intellectual or emotional place. Then I have emotions attached to things. I have other wild ideas connected to things. I'm a very tangential thinker, and probably have, I don't know, undiagnosed ADHD. Possibly I've taken some assessments of my own. It was like, oh, this kind of describes my mind a lot. I'm big into tangential thinking a lot. And I think that might be because instead of having concrete images in my head when I'm trying to imagine things, my brain is making free associations constantly, and emotional reactions. A lot of my ideas tend to be sort of violent in nature. And I'm not a violent person. I'm actually very pacifistic. I've been robbed twice at gunpoint. And like
Oh
when I
my
see
gosh.
depictions of violence, like I mean, even now, just whenever I think about it, like I can feel the hair, you know, hairs stand on the back of my neck, and I have a very emotional reaction to it. But I think um, because of just, I think, you know, the emotions related to violence sometimes, um, I think my brain goes there in order to kind of elicit emotions. When I teach, I tend to use violent metaphors, and it's partly to grab my students' attention, and I can then refer back to them later. They're very memorable analogies. I use this analogy a lot of times of when naming objects, because I teach video games. Long story short, I teach, you know, interactive animation, game development, game design, and I have an analogy where I talk about like open heart surgery. I have an analogy where I talk about somebody punching my mom in the face and how we're no longer friends forever. And they actually make sense in the context of the class, but they're metaphors that grab my students' attention sort of emotionally and viscerally, that then we can refer to them later, sort of creating a shorthand vocabulary for certain concepts that are attached to violent things. And
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm just so enjoying listening and understanding a little bit more about who you are, Josh, and like how these different really dynamic, cool pieces fit together so uniquely to make what is you today teaching these classes. And I think what you've been describing is such a testament too to like the benefits of self-awareness, but also the challenges of when self-awareness turns into acute like comparison, right? Because you talk about this imposter syndrome that comes up, but really you have this special strength that everyone else has not had the chance to grow because they're seeing things without having to connect emotionally, right? And as I think about, you know, from a distance, because I don't really know much about gaming personally, you know, what it takes to help someone feel like they're really entering a different world, I imagine that emotional part actually could show up in ways that are really eye-opening and useful.
sure. In fact, I actually tell my students, I kind of impose a restriction a lot of times where so many game ideas resort to violence. And it comes out of sort of laziness, I guess. Not necessarily laziness on the designer's part, but the fact that if you put, if somebody starts a game and they have a gun in their hand, there's an immediate sort of understanding of what they're supposed to do. If I as a player have a gun in my hand and the other person that I'm encountering, or the other thing that I'm encountering in the game, has a gun or something that looks like a weapon in their hand, immediately there is a fight or flight response. There is an understanding of a mechanic of, oh, okay, I guess I'm supposed to attack them before they attack me, kind of thing. And so I challenge my students a lot of times to not fall into that laziness when they're trying to design stuff, to not just immediately go to the violence as a way of, in fact, for me personally, the games that I really dig are abstract games that are just simple colors and shapes. I'm a big fan of finding sort of universal ways to communicate ideas within games, communicate to the player so that they have some sort of intuitive understanding. And it's really, really challenging. The more you abstract a game, or the more you abstract the visuals, or the experience in any sort of way, whether it's the because video games are very much an audiovisual experience, which I think actually falls under the umbrella of just what I love about animation in general. I mean, animation, because I still teach interactive animation. I still teach animation courses every once in a while. And I'm still very much a student of animation. I just didn't have the patience for it. I wasn't fast enough to actually animate, because animation is slow motion filmmaking, but at some point you have to be sort of fast enough to be able to well, actually make 12 to 24 drawings a second to be able to do it. But there's a level of abstraction in animation that makes things accessible. It's sort of the classic idea of a smiley face. A smiley face is almost universally understood, cross-culturally as a face. I mean, we recognize just a circle and a couple dots is oftentimes enough. You throw another line in to express the emotion, depending on what the mouth looks like. People engage with it. It emotes in sort of almost an innocent, childlike way. But then animation in general allows you to, I mean, what I really love, my favorite animations are the ones that can tell wild stories that you really just can't tell with, live action. A person can't make their body do the weird, crazy contortions that are necessary to tell the story. And then also even stories that are grounded very much in reality and have sort of a naturalistic, realistic style. There's a film called Grave of the Fireflies. Isao Takahata, who's, everybody knows Hayao Miyazaki from Ghibli, but Isao Takahata was one of the other main forces within Studio Ghibli, and he made this film. Have you seen Grave of the Fireflies at all?
No.
I highly recommend this film.
Okay.
However, bring a tissue box when you do, because it is one of the saddest movies I have ever seen in my life. Like I kind of want to cry right now just thinking about it. But
Gosh.
it's animated. It's about these two kids, it sort of it's World War II. The atomic bomb has just been dropped, and these kids slowly over the course of the film die of radiation sickness and starvation, and they have just these horrible experiences as they're dealing with post nuclear Japan in World War II. But it doesn't spoil anything, actually, because they literally die in the first few minutes of the film. Like they just punch you in the face and just get that pain out of the way, sort of numb you a little bit to it. But I really do truly believe that it's a film that has a greater impact because it's animated. That extra level of abstraction, I think, adds accessibility. Because if you were to watch a movie where two human children that we recognize as actors even, just die right away as the movie starts, and then knowing that they're going to die, and as the movie flashes back and then tells their story, I think so many people would just be, their defense mechanisms would go up in a way. There's sort of emotional deflection that we do to insulate ourselves from horrible tragedy, that because it's animated, I think it gives us a window into that world in a way that we can go on this emotional journey and still experience it and learn from the experience, which is, to me, really, really exciting. There's also an amazing sort of fanciful sequence where they're literally dying and they're hallucinating, and they hallucinate fireflies in this sort of fanciful scene. That scene in particular, would have required some sort of animation or visual effects, even just shadows and light, and there would have been something to be able to communicate that. And I think animation was necessary for that. But there's a whole lot of that movie that you really could have just had actors portraying it, but it wouldn't have had the same sort of emotional resonance. And I mean, that's an example of something that's non-interactive. We're as a passive viewer, we're experiencing it. And there is sort of a little bit, that's what I love about film, that even though it is sort of a passive experience where we're just watching something and listening to something, you still, if it's a good film, is emotionally impactful. And now add that layer of interactivity on top of it. And for me, if a video game can tell a story in that way, and then you are literally, well, not literally, but in the world space, you are the player, you are that person making those choices, going through those things, having those, triumphs and tragedies, being part of your experience in the video game. I mean, there have definitely been video games that have made me cry, like just where I just had to like set the controller down and just like, whew, I got to take a moment here, because like emotionally I was that character and was experiencing, those sort of, I guess, traumas or emotional journeys, that it's that extra level. And in sometimes even the games that aren't necessarily very photoreal, graphical, again, that extra level of abstraction, I think is just really, really powerful. It's something that I love about the medium. And I can't stop talking about it because I
Ah,
love it.
it's so powerful. The way you're describing it and that abstraction is helping me to appreciate the real art form that is gaming. And I think I've taken that for granted when I look at just the blockbuster version of games, right? That mass market, whatever. I feel like this is helping me to understand that there's so much nuance to what goes into this world. And like any other world, there are like indie buckets or a whole just different slew of approaches to take that can allow people to really reckon with themes that they hadn't considered before, walks that they had not taken personally. So I love what abstraction can do for that in the way that you're describing it. But I'm also curious, going back a little bit in your story, you've grown up in Southern California, right? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
I'm SoCal born and raised.
You're a SoCal guy through and through. And you've mentioned these interests in music, in film, and gaming. Do you think that that has anything to do with where you live? Do you feel like there was any unique kind of ways that you got to reckon with or interact with those
Oh
intersections of
yeah,
culture in Southern California? I'd love to hear what that was like for you.
yeah. Oh, I definitely think SoCal has influenced me. I mean, just also my peer group, my friend group. I mean, so much of my journey has been because of somebody I know. I mean, like I already mentioned about, I'm convinced that I got into UCL animation because of a personal connection. But every job that I've ever had has been through a personal connection. But then Southern California, definitely. I mean, what I love about it is that you can like surf in the morning and hike in the afternoon, and weather. If you want to enjoy the seasons, if you want to enjoy weather, you can go find them. They don't impose themselves upon you. I mean, when you emailed last night, it took me a little while to reply because I was literally at the beach. Like
Oh
it
my
was,
gosh.
and I was really surprised. I mean, yay global warming. If there's any silver lining there, and the horrible tragedy that is the
So
impending existential crisis of climate change. But the Pacific Ocean was really warm last night, and so my daughter and I were out in the water until like 7 p.m. watching the sunset and picking up sand fleas in the sand. And it was really, really warm and fantastic. And I think just, well, LA is very much, sort of the cultural center, Hollywood of film, the music scene. I mean, we used to, so I grew up in Ventura, which is a coastal city. It's where Patagonia, which I don't know if you'd heard, they just made a big announcement about donating all of their money from Patagonia to help fight climate change. And we're really proud as, people from Ventura of that company. But I would spend, for me, once I had a car, or once I was the oldest of my peer group, so I was one of the first to get a car, and we would spend every weekend in high school, we would drive either down to LA or up to Santa Barbara to check out, some amazing band. I learned about so many awesome bands. that I never otherwise would have heard of. I think the internet helped expand my musical taste, but I was very fortunate to have very broad musical taste early on. I mean, I remember that my dad used to wake us up each morning for school, and by blasting classical music. Vivaldi, I think in particular, was a big one in our house. And then again, being in a band and being able to play at places, play house parties and things. I think LA is Southern California in particular. I don't know, it's hard for me to tell for sure, but it feels like a sort of unique thing. My mom and my brother moved to Idaho many years back, and my mom keeps saying about the housing market. We eventually bought a house in LA. It was a struggle, but for the longest time, she's like, oh, you should move to Idaho. It's way cheaper out here. But I was like, but then I'm away from all the movies and the music. I mean, there's a theater in that has managed to survive the pandemic. Actually, there's a whole bunch of theaters in LA, but there's one in particular called the New Art, and the New Art Theater would play a lot of world cinema. I mean, the fact that I got to see films, anime films from Japan, from Korea, from China, Thailand. I got to see them in the theater on the big screen, and experience them, in subtitles, and get that cinematic experience with. You don't get that in a small town in Idaho. They don't bring those big films there. I mean, the internet now has sort of opened up the world in general, but for me, growing up in the the 80s and 90s, just as the internet was starting to take off, I think I was able to experience sort of multicultural, broad, even international experiences, just being in Southern California where all that stuff's going on.
Yes. Oh, that's I think you're absolutely right. The internet, opens up a lot of doors, but there's still not it's not quite the same as being in the place where all of the groups are colliding and all the house parties are intersecting with all the different video game, like just so many worlds
Yeah,
crossing at once, it seems like, in that epicenter, which is so exciting. And
live
um
live
it,
music, yeah, and
yes,
just even clapping or laughing at the same time, in a movie, like being in a theater and everybody sort of gasps at the same time. It's, even though it's an individual experience, you're watching the screen, you're having your own thing, just knowing that there are other people around you in a theater. That was something during the pandemic that was just devastating to me, to like not be able to go to a theater.
you are so right. I went to the ballet yesterday at Lincoln Center, and I didn't really realize until I was walking. I was like, I haven't been here since 2019. Like, I've been watching online, I've been doing these things, but everyone did gasp at the same time when the ballerina was actually like funny, and we're like, that was not what we were expecting, right? Like, that is so true, and I hadn't appreciated that in the same way till yesterday. So very cool timing that you would share that. And so I'm hearing about now, what it meant for you to live in this place. You talked a little bit about, you studied communication for your BA, and then you went on to your MFA in animation. I want to keep going
Oh
down
yeah.
that kind of concrete logistical trail to how you keep refining this intersection of computer science and animation in your life. So there's some
Yeah.
job titles that stand out to me in there: technical coordinator, assistant editor, like editorial coordinator, lead programmer. They all sound cool and confusing to me. So if you would lead us there, I would love to learn.
Yeah. So I lucked out in that, when I was in grad school, it was kind of in the heyday of Macromedia Flash, and what eventually became Adobe Flash, which is a tool that sort of democratized animation, and it also democratized game development. It was an early tool that allowed, it's a vector-based application. It was very much for the web. It's vector, so it's all math. Everything you draw ends up just being converted to mathematical functions, and then you can end up with full many minute long animations that are only a few megs and really easy to download. It streams really well. And so when in my second year at grad school, I took an interactive animation class that I learned that you can do a little bit of animation and a little bit of programming, and you can make games. And my head exploded. I just was like, wow, this is for me. This is what I want to do. And I kind of became the unofficial TA for the class, and was helping all my classmates, because for me, I had taken computer science classes. Like I said, all my friends were programmers. We had worked on a few games of our own as kids, just sort of as we were learning things. For me, programming was really sort of dry and not really accessible. It's all numbers in, numbers out. But when I learned that you can do a little bit of programming and interact with a little bit of art, that just really resonated with me. And I was so excited to the point where I had actually finished all my coursework that second year, but the instructor for the class was like, had encouraged me to be the teaching assistant for the following year. And so I actually took out an extra student loan. I enrolled in an independent study so that I was actually enrolled in courses. Actually, and then I took, I think, a few other classes that I wasn't required to take: cinematography, experimental animation, or experimental film. Um, that those classes I think were really, for me, I was in grad school. I might as well learn as much as I can. It's something I tell my students all the time. Like, you never need permission to learn. And I think sometimes in academia, there tends to be this perception, at least from the student side. I think instructors are not, professors are less inclined to impose these sort of things, but there's a lot of students, I feel like they wait for that moment. They're looking at the syllabus and they're going, okay, we're not going to get to that until later. But I'm a big fan of just go forth and learn. Don't wait for anybody. And that was something that, I learned myself, was that I took that opportunity to take those classes I didn't have to take. I mean, when I was in undergrad, I took a physics class that I didn't have to take, and oh my God, was that helpful uh, in video games, because so much of video games is simple trajectory, projectile physics, and just vector math and all that sort of stuff. But when I was the TA for the class, and it turned out that the following year, the instructor for the class ended up getting a full-time job here at LMU. And he was teaching at three schools part-time: UCLA, the Art Institute, at LMU, but he got a full-time position at LMU. Tom Klein, who's one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, one of my dearest friends now, when he had to give up his classes, even though I had just been his TA, I was fresh out of grad school. I hadn't even finished the program. I was taking time to finish my thesis my thesis project, but he had offered me to, in fact, actually, I was already teaching on, I was working on 9 at the time,
Yeah.
the feature animation 9. Shane Acker was one of my friends uh, from grad school. Actually, we weren't really close friends, but we had a lot of acquaintances. My second year film was in a few festivals, student film festivals, with his thesis film, which was 9, the short film. And in 2005, 2006, they had started working on pre-production for a feature film. And I had provided some tech support for Shane at one point, went into the offices when it was literally just him and one other person and a producer. And then when they actually started pre-production for real, I was hired on as a coordinator, or as one of the assistants, and then kind of got bumped up to coordinator, because I'm very technical savvy, I guess. I'm a quick study. I learn very fast, and I think learning to learn is one of the most important skills that somebody can have. And so for me, I'm not afraid of software. I'm not afraid of not knowing something. If somebody asks me something, it's like, I don't know how to do it, but let's do it. And so I went through all sort of flavors of assistant and coordinator on the pre-production, started in the art department, story, helped build the sort of editorial pipeline there. And so I was working full time when I got offered to teach at UCLA, teach the class that I had literally just taken 2 years prior and had been the teaching assistant for the year prior. And suddenly I was teaching that class. I was teaching at the Art Institute as well. In fact, it turned out I really had 2 full-time jobs at the time. I had a full-time job on 9 as a coordinator, but then and we ended up making up a title for me, a technical coordinator on 9. I think that was my final credit on it, because I was having a hand in all sorts of different departments. But then and then was teaching multiple classes at the Art Institute, teaching at UCLA. I ended up going off. I had to give up the teaching jobs to go off to Luxembourg when the 9 production went to Luxembourg, and we ended up in Toronto. And then and so I wasn't. There was one quarter I had gone back and taught some classes in between Luxembourg and Toronto, and then ended up being pulled onto Despicable Me. The line producer on 9 had she had gotten pulled into this new venture that Universal was doing, called Illumination. They were building a studio, and they were starting a production. It was originally called Evil Me at that time, or Project E, I think we called it. and they needed help setting up the editorial pipeline. And so the line producer pulled me into that job. In fact, it was a weird sort of coincidence where she had moved on to another project, but some of her stuff had gotten sent to Luxembourg and then eventually got sent to Toronto. And so she heard that I was back in town from Toronto from 9 and said, hey, she asked me to bring her stuff back to LA. So I brought it back, and she heard I was back in town and said, hey, can you bring me, I'll buy you lunch. Can you bring me your stuff, or bring me my stuff? And as I was on my way out the door, she texted and said, hey, bring your resume. And I was like, well, I haven't updated my resume since like grad school. I didn't even have to really apply for the 9 job because I knew Shane. And so I just printed out something. I think it was literally, I think the last thing on there was like when I worked at Trader Joe's in undergrad and grad school. And even Trader Joe's, I got a job at Trader Joe's because one of my best friends, his dad was a manager at one of the other Trader Joe's. But I printed out my resume, showed up, didn't even have to show it to anybody. I was introduced to the head of production, Janet Healy, and Janet just right away, without me saying anything really, she was like, when can you start? We've heard so much about you. When can you start? We need somebody to help us set up this, this new movie. And I was like, well, I'm kind of burnt out. I'm like not ready to start a new job. And I'm getting married this weekend, kind of thing. And yeah, but then I was learning about the project and learning about what they wanted. And they said, all right, just give us 6 weeks. And 6 weeks turned into 6 months. But then I was offered teaching jobs again. And so I decided feature production wasn't for me. It wasn't as creatively fulfilling, especially once we got the ball rolling. For me, the problem solving of building that editorial pipeline for that film that ended up becoming a $1 billion franchise was really exciting to me. But once we got into kind of the rut of filmmaking and just the every day is more or less the same sort of thing, and I was on the production side. I was the person that was tasked with going to the story artist and saying, hey, those boards were due yesterday. Why don't you have them done yet? And then being like, well, I know that it was an unrealistic deadline was imposed upon you, but that to me, that was sort of soul crushing in the creative process. And so when I got the opportunity to teach again, and I had such a great time teaching in the years prior, that I just, even if it was part-time, like I left, I probably would have made a lot of money because at that time, Illumination was doing a revenue share with the crew because it was literally the first thing. And it turned out to make so much money that some of my friends that I brought onto the show made, they paid off their student loans. But I mean, I still got a decent bonus check, but if I had stayed on, it would have, and if I stayed on, I probably would have been a producer there. But for me, it was more creatively fulfilling to teach. And so I started teaching again at the Art Institute. Met one of the instructors there at the Art Institute, actually somebody who had taken over my class for me when I went off to Luxembourg and ended up on Despicable Me. He asked me to, this guy, Elliot, he's like, hey, you seem to really get along with people. Like, I have a client that is kind of hard to get along with. Would you be interested in trying to work with them on something? And that ended up turning into actually a really good relationship. I worked with that client for a lot doing, so I ended up becoming a freelance app developer, a freelance game developer while teaching as well. Since I started teaching, I kept asking my students what their favorite video games were. And I hadn't played any of them because I had given up video games in that time, like cold turkey. And at some point I realized, I got to start playing again. So I bought a Wii, bought an Xbox, bought a PlayStation. And now I have them all. I try to play as much of everything as I can, just a little bit. But just for the literacy, just for understanding, what is it that kids are playing now? Well, I say kids, but of course now it's adults that are playing too. And so it was just, again, a series of coincidences, people I knew, and just being, I guess, receptive to opportunities when a door opened. And I mean, I had no business setting. I didn't really have that much experience to be able to justify the responsibilities that I had on the feature films that I worked on. But because I was willing to learn, because I was a quick study, and I think because I had some of the confidence there, I was willing to take those risks. And I mean, even just everything, applying to an animation program, not really having much experience there, being editorial coordinator, technical coordinator, teaching, like these were all things that I didn't really have experience going into them when I got those opportunities, but I was able to learn, and I think that was really really rewarding. And then I ended up being able to get a full-time staff job here at LMU, the animation technical services engineer. I had worked with the engineer prior as part-time faculty, and when he went on paternity leave, I was kind of available. I was freelancing. I was teaching part-time and I was freelancing, so I was able to step in, cover for him for a while he was becoming a dad. And then he ended up moving on to, he graduated. He was doing grad school here at LMU. One of the things about LMU is they do tuition remission, so you're able to take classes and learn as your staff. And so once he graduated, he went on to a job, and the job opened up, and because it was so similar to the kind of things I was doing on 9 and Despicable Me, and I was looking for maybe calming down my work schedule. I mean, I had so many jobs going on at once that having a single job that still allowed me to teach was really important. And that's when I got the desk job and have the collection of equipment and stuff in my office
Love it.
behind me.
That's so cool. Thank you so much for helping me to understand a little bit more of, how those pieces continue to fit together and build on each other for you. I feel like it's a really hard thing to be on the flashy path and like be in these feature films and decide, that's not really my path. Like it's a fine path, but there might be one that I'm more uniquely, charged with filling right now. And one of the things from our first conversation that you said was, how we live our lives imprints on other people. And I think you have such a teacher spirit in you that I get to enjoy in this conversation, right? Like there's these great nuggets of wisdom and this, you can feel this like desire that you have to kind of encourage people, I think, and share what has worked for you and kind of be part of their lives. And I think that's really cool that you were willing to be like, I really enjoy this and I do really want to, maybe have this full-time thing and not 8 jobs right now. And so I'm going to do that because that's what's right for me and my family and my people in this season. So I enjoy hearing that from you. But something else that you have said in the past that stood out to me, you had said, I think something about, the difference isn't in having insane talent, but an ability to find flow at doing something, right? If you're willing to lose yourself in what would be tedious for someone else, that's the difference maker that you've described. I'd love for you to unpack that for people because it's so good.
Yeah, we have a lot of students, especially, and it was something that I felt like I experienced it firsthand again with my imposter syndrome. And for me, like once I realized that I can program, that was when I was like, oh, I do have something. I do have a piece that I can contribute to this larger thing. And suddenly I became like the guy that was helping with programming and everything. But I don't think I have any sort of innate talent for programming. And I don't think that, the artists that I've encountered, students and colleagues and friends and mentors that are amazing artists and do have what would generally be called talent. I really don't think talent is anything necessarily innate or physical. It tends to be just not knowing that you're practicing, to be able to find flow and to gain that experience. For me, because of, I think, possibly the aphantasia and like just when I want to draw something, I need reference. I need something that I can look at to help inform that. And it takes a long time. And I think because of it takes time, it feels like a struggle to me. I can, if it's something I really like doing, I maybe I'll be able to find flow and lose myself in the experience, lose time. But when I'm programming and when I'm teaching and when I'm talking about the things that I love, like the world goes away. I end up, sort of tunnel vision, and I'm able to find flow in that moment and enjoy the process, enjoy what might otherwise be tedious for somebody else who might not have, a talent for that. So I think a lot of times it ends up being a sort of a mental disposition, whether or not you can enjoy what would otherwise be tedious work for other people, I think is what, if you can find that thing that you're passionate about, because really the only difference between an amateur and an expert is experience. How much time that you have dedicated to the thing that you are trying to learn or master. And I think for a lot of people, if it doesn't come naturally, or if the flow doesn't come naturally, because I feel like if you have somebody to coach you through those that initial struggle of something and help guide you to find flow, I think that just about anybody can become an expert in just about anything. But again, it takes that time, and it takes that frame of mind to be in the place to just put in the work, do the practice. And it's really, in fact, there's a quote from Henry Rollins once, who was talking about, like, he was talking about how, again, Henry Rollins is somebody who, he was, lead singer of a really influential punk band early on. And it was, but he fell into that. He had no business doing it. But he was saying something like, I don't have talent, I have tenacity, I have drive, I have passion for the thing. And I think that really resonates with me, the idea that the talent is that ambition to do the thing. I mean, sometimes it takes that conscientious ambition, that self-awareness of, like, this is the thing that I want to do. But sometimes it just happens naturally, where, through a series of happy accidents, you're given the opportunity to experience something. And if it resonates with you, if you find yourself enjoying it, and you find yourself losing time and just, doing the thing without even being aware of the fact that you're doing the thing, that that's, I think, really something worth fostering. It's something that now I have kids, and I have my own little personal students, where my daughter's, in fact, on the way home from the beach last night, my daughter asked me about, she says, Daddy, what is gravity? Like, why does gravity work? And we had this big, long conversation. We were stuck in traffic because everybody was leaving the beach.
Sure.
And it was this big, long conversation. We talked about space-time and the concept of fabric of space-time, and pulling a sheet and a ball going to the center and things going around and all this. And we made it all the way to home. And she's like, wow, that took a long time to explain. And I was like, well, sometimes, concepts require, complex concepts require a lot of extra context, a lot of extra things to explain. And I was constantly asking her questions. She would ask me a question, and sometimes she gets really frustrated when I'll answer her questions with a question, to see, kind of, to suss out what she understands about the thing. And I feel like, asking questions when is an important part of the creative process. I feel like learning in general is about knowing which questions to ask, and or at least being, when presented with a question, going off and seeking that answer. Knowledge isn't just an information presentation. It comes through this process of asking questions and then finding answers in that context. And I think a lot of times I have a tendency to ramble and provide too much information. I think in my reply to you last night, I mean, you didn't need to know that I was going to be in my office, but for me, sometimes answering a question with sometimes information overload is important to build context for the experience and for the understanding about something. So that's what I love about this whole project that you're doing, and asking questions and finding out, asking people about their experiences, to me is so exciting. I should be asking you more questions, but
I'm so enjoying it. And thank you for how you described that. I love this image that keeps coming up of getting lost in something. I think that can be a really beautiful thing. And I think also it's kind of a go-to image for me when I think of, like, the artist that's, like, so intensely in their craft, right? There's this understanding of someone who tucks themselves into their studio for days on end, like, forgets to eat, like, and that's, like, very romanticized, right? But then I think of the other vulnerable side that you shared of being a student and forgetting you had a test that you were going to be studying for, right? And the game feel. And I think about, the responsibility that might come up for people who are in this space of making games, whether you've had to reckon with that yet, and whether your personal experience comes into how you show up to making games and experiencing games now. Like, I come from this social work perspective, right, where I see kids who deal with disordered gaming, right, where they've taken this thing that's really beautiful and has a potential to really rock their world, and unfortunately it's become something that's kind of hindering them in other areas of development. Like, how does that, and maybe that doesn't show up in that space, there's so many people who have to touch this, but if you
yeah.
have anything to say about it, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Well, you mentioned game feel, and I think that's something that, when teaching about games, there's this concept of, it's not just the mechanics of the game or the discrete, like, how you interact with the game, but it's how you feel about the game as you're playing with it. And this can be abstracted a little bit larger to just user interaction. And then there's this concept of, UI. UI is how a user interacts with thing. UI being like the user interface. It's the thing that facilitates the interaction. So in a video game, it would be the controller itself, the buttons, and how, with the actions that they're mapped to, the on-screen, the heads-up display, the things that's conveying certain information about, the status of the player as they're playing. And in UI, there's then this concept of UX, user experience, and sort of one of the classic examples of breakfast, eating cereal. The UI would be the bowl and the spoon, because that's how you interact with your cereal, right? But user experience, the UX, would be the temperature of the milk, how crunchy it is, how long the milk has been soaking into the cereal, and how it feels in your, the mouth feel. My wife is a big foodie, and we watch a lot of, or she watches a lot of sort of cooking shows, and when they're judging the food, sometimes they'll talk about the mouth feel, and that same goes for video games. It's not just I press a button, the character jumps. There's all this, we sometimes talk about it as like juice. There's this extra stuff that as a designer, as a developer, that we can add on to it, so that when the character jumps, is there a sound associated with the jump? Is there a little bit of squash and stretch that happens to really sell the jump? In classic animation, we have a concept of anticipation, where for every action, there is sort of a thing that happens beforehand. A punch isn't just hand coming out, it's arm pulling back. It's the classic teapot example. It's when the steam is about to come out of the teapot, the steam just doesn't just suddenly come out of the teapot. The teapot actually sort of squishes down towards the table and then pops up as there's this force, there's this action of the steam coming out. And so we call that antic or anticipation. And in video games, sometimes we lose a lot of that anticipation, because when you push a button, you want that punch to just happen immediately. In fact, we call it punchy action, even for something that's jumping. When I push that button, it feels sluggish if we have the character sink down and then pop up beforehand, which in animation we'll do that. We'll have the character, if it's a big jump, we're going to spend a few frames, or maybe even a half a second, of that character really squishing themselves small before they stretch tall, as they on their upward trajectory. But in video games, that needs to be a little bit more punchy. So we sometimes juice it up a little bit with extra stuff, like that sound, kind of that boing that happens when the character jumps, or that little sound when they hit the ground, little dust that happens. If a character runs, if you can get a little dust trail behind them, or some extra little flowy thing that happens, that's all adding to the feel of the game, and adding that extra little juice that sort of makes it, even if it's really unrealistic sometimes. I mean, that boing sound, right? Like when we jump, we don't hear that sound, but it actually connects the player to the character a lot more. I mean, it sort of, it's hokey to say in the context of a jump, but it grounds them in a way that we feel like, okay, well, if we didn't get that extra time before the jump, because we want that immediate response, otherwise, we're going to get hit by the thing that's coming out of us that we're trying to jump out of the way, or we're gonna miss the ledge. In fact, one of my favorite games of all time is a platformer called Celeste, made by Matty Thorson, and it's a diabolically difficult game. It's one of those where my daughter was playing was playing a Mario game recently, and she kept dying, and I kept telling her, she was ready to give up, and I kept telling her that at some point, I haven't done it yet, but at some point I'm going to load up Celeste and show her, because it actually keeps track of your death count, and it was in the thousands. I mean, it was like 3,500 times I had died over the course of that game, but I just kept playing, and dying is part of the process. It's learning. It's an incremental thing, and that's what I love about video games too. Even in the context of violence, is that it provides little mini problems, little mini challenges that you can learn, and the stakes are actually really low. In the game, sometimes, yeah, you die, but you start over and you do it again, taking whatever you learned into the next step. And it's a good sort of training simulation for life, because I tell my daughter all the time, like, it's okay to make mistakes. You're going to learn from your mistakes, but in real life, some mistakes you do not get a do-over. You do not get it. Sometimes, it's the don't run out into the street. Why do you got to wear your seatbelt? Why do you got to stay close? Why do you not jump off of high things? Like, there are certain things that you will learn the hard way, and some mistakes you don't get a chance to learn from. But games allow you that ability to make mistakes and to learn little sort of micro goals. Tim Minchin, there's an Australian comedian musician who gave a keynote address at a graduation speech, and talked about set small goals for yourself, be micro ambitious, I think was the term that he used, which I really thought was cool. And it's something that I think even for me, without even planning to live my life that way, I think has I feel like I have been micro ambitious and open to those sort of things. And video games allow you to do that. You have a certain goal in mind, you set out for that goal, and then you move on to the next one. And so anything that the designer can do to sort of enhance the immersive experience for the player, it makes it, just that much more satisfying, and the player can actually get something. I mean, video games oftentimes are dismissed as sort of a digression. They're a distraction. They're a waste of time. It was it John Lennon said, time wasted is not wasted if you've enjoyed it, or I'm wildly misparaphrasing, but that idea that when you're spending time, but if there's any ever moment for you to learn or grow as a person and not just completely waste time, I think is and just even as a way of calming your mind and finding flow. There are games that I play that are just completely mind numbing. I'm not learning anything. They're just helping me to be present in the moments after the game. When I put the controller down, I've cleared my mind, and I'm able to find focus in other things. And I think that's really, really rewarding as well.
I love that. And thank you for going there and explaining a bit about what that feel means, but also something I hadn't considered, which is that failability and that usefulness of failing to learn the tricks or skills and try again in the next go at it. I think that's a really helpful image that I'm gonna remember as I try to keep trying new things, even though I don't like failing at all. And I wonder, so you mentioned just now to your ability to, at this point in life, take it away and let what you experienced in the game be useful to being present in the life you live outside of it. Do you have any tricks or skills for yourself that help you to like, okay, I'm going to turn this off now? Do you set a time limit for yourself so that you leave that world? Does it have to be that regimented? Is it more of like a soul check-in? Like what would you advise someone who's wary of that risk that it could become all consuming for them? I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Well, I'm still very much addicted to video games. Like I can lose myself in a game, and it can be problematic. I don't stay up late at night as much. I mean, now that I'm older, like my body, I just can't pull all-nighters playing games.
Yeah.
Like I used to. And having a family, having like, I got to get up in the morning, take my kids to school, get to work kind of thing. I think especially among college kids, when they're out on their own, I think that was when, for me, my parents, they used to set a time limit when we played video games, and that I think was really, really helpful. At the time, I completely resented the fact that my parents limited screen time. But it's something that, now being a parent, oh my God, I totally appreciate, love you, mom and dad. Thank you for doing that, just setting those limits. And I think it wasn't until I got to college that video games became really addictive for me and became problematic to the point where I had to give them up for a while. So I think now as an adult, well, also, and that's the thing that to me was, to circle back, way back to like Flash, Macromedia Flash, which eventually became Adobe Animate, and then ultimately Unity and Unreal Engine. The video game world, the ability to be an independent game maker, game developer, game designer, these tools came out that really democratized game development and game production. And so you end up with these amazing independent game makers, Matty Thorson, and the people they can make games on their own and can reach wide audiences. The internet, Valve, Steam, and all the other now similar platforms that allow people to, you don't have to go to a store and brick and mortar and buy a physical copy. It's not limited to how many copies of the game are made in a physical media, that you're able to download it and install it and play the game and experience it on all sorts. And then, of course, mobile devices have completely changed, the pun intended, I guess, changed the game in terms of game development, and have brought games to a much wider audience and much more accessible. Accessibility in general is a big passion of mine, for just games, making sure that differently abled people are able to encounter games. There was a mobile game that I had played called The Dark Room, that originally started off as a Flash web game, but somebody had gotten permission to port it over to a mobile device. And when you beat the game, and it's all text based, it's like little symbols to represent things. It's sort of there is a story, you explore things, there's resource management. And when I played the game, I was so blown away by how simple it was, but yet how affecting. The story that it ended up telling was really kind of moving. And then so I played it again with audio commentary turned on. They had audio commentary for it. And in the commentary, the developer was talking about an experience, an interaction that they had had with a gamer that was stuck. One of the players of the game was stuck at a certain point in the game, and the developer was really kind of baffled, because it was like, well, it's right there, it should be pretty obvious. It's right there on screen. And through the course of talking with the player, it turned out that the player was visually impaired. They were blind, and they were interacting with this game that was entirely text based. And it turned out that they were using an accessibility option built into to iOS, I think it was, that it was speech to text based, or text to speech, where the device was speaking out what was on screen. And so the developer then worked closely with this player and a community of players, actually, to make the game fully accessible to visually impaired folks. And that had a really big impact on me as somebody then teaching students and teaching design, because I'm pretty able-bodied, although I did break my wrist and now have horrible scars a few years ago. And trying to play games one-handed was sort of a strange experience, and really made me sympathetic to accessibility, and made me even more passionate about making sure that games are accessible to people, because I think that there's experiences and that are worthwhile for people to find. And so anything that we can do as designers to make sure that as many people as possible, not just to get those dollars, to not to chase that money, but to allow players who might not otherwise have access to the games. Just that little extra thing, even just color blindness settings, to high contrast things, subtitles, and the ability to adjust the size of subtitles is such a simple thing that developers can do to make their games more accessible.
It's so cool what can happen when we stop taking for granted that everyone else experiences the world the same way that we do, right? Like there's so many different ways to take in the same exact thing. And so it's cool to see how that's being applied in the world that you are influenced by and are influencing. As we keep abstracting out and get closer to wrapping up, I'd love to ask, you've shared this image with me, I think, of like the Venn diagram with artist, like programmer, and there just being this like slight maybe but really wonderful overlap. And I want to know from you, why does that matter? Why does having that overlap matter?
I mean, for me personally, I feel like I occupied that sliver in between, and I really do. It's something that I talk about, among my students and colleagues, and we had talked previously. I feel like it's a bit of a false dichotomy of sort of the artist and the programmer, or the artist and the scientist. There's a lot of that, left brain, right brain, which they've done studies, and it turns out that's not at all true. That was a thing that was unfortunately made its way into pop psychology that has affected how people teach things. There really isn't that left-mindedness, right-mindedness. And again, talent and the idea of artist versus scientist, or objectively minded people versus subjectively minded people. But I think people tend towards those things. They sort of self-segregate, self-select into that, depending on, again, how they find flow, like what they perceive as their own natural talents of things. And so for me, it's about sort of breaking down those barriers. Again, my classes, I teach animators and I teach computer scientists. And I'm always trying to find ways to get the animators to think more like computer scientists, and the computer scientists think more like animators or artists. And I mean, it was a passion project of mine since we started it at LMU years ago, and it took about a decade to get off the ground. But we recently started this interactive gaming and immersive minor which is basically reinforcing the intersection between computer science and animation, and making sure that students are able to take classes and to see the other world. And it's something that I tell my students a lot, where even if they're animators, by learning how to program and learning the game development process, they are learning a language, they're gaining a conversational vocabulary in this what would otherwise be a foreign world to them, so that they're able to then find jobs in the game industry as animators and artists, that they can then, you know, at least understand what the programmers are doing, and the same for programmers, so that they're able to understand a little bit of what the artist side of it is, so that, you know, when you, like, same reason why when you go to a foreign country, it's important to kind of learn at least conversational
Yeah.
language, so that you're not ripped off, that you're able to find your way around. And I feel like that's, I'm trying to take those separate circles, or sometimes those siloed circles, and nudge them together so that they overlap a little bit more in a Venn diagram, so that students can occupy. And again, even for long-term career aspirations, to be an artist programmer, that opens so many worlds. I mean, artists, it turns out, those jobs are harder to come by. Like, I mean, what an amazing thing to be an artist and get paid to do it. And so it's very, very competitive. And it turns out that there's a lot more projects that need programmers. And so if artists can get a little bit more programming under their belt, and can speak that language a little bit more, they're really opening a lot of doors for themselves.
Yes. Is there any encouragement or wisdom you could share with someone who maybe feels like they are closer to the ends of those circles and wants to move towards the overlapping section, but doesn't know how to start or feels intimidated by it?
Get out of your comfort zone. Like, that's the big thing, because I think it's very easy to, and it's easy for me to say, because I'm the type of person now, my personality, where it's really easy for me to do that. And I realize that a lot of artists, especially in animation, tend to be sort of extremes at the personality spectrum. There are a lot of ton of introverts, some extroverts, to the point of like being really big personalities that can sometimes scare away other people. And even in computer science, that, I mean, there's a very much a stereotype there of introverts among computer scientists. And I think it's important to get out of your bubble, out of your social safety net, I guess, a little bit, and network. I mean, I was reading a book recently that was specifically about stereotype there. It's called Whistling Vivaldi, and the idea that there was a passage where they mentioned about 85% of Americans get their jobs, their careers are started because of acquaintances, which very much my career path was that. And that they were mentioning it, the author was mentioning it in the context of segregation that happens among campuses, where people find cliques, and it happens among gender identities and racial ethnicity background. People tend to segregate themselves, and by doing so, they're closing off themselves to future career opportunities, because their network, their social circle, isn't as encompassing as it could be. And then even just, you know, the more ideas you have rattling around in your head, the more you know about the rest of the world. It's one of the things that I love about LMU, and the fact that it's just a general liberal arts college, that students are required to take classes outside of their major. And I think that makes, you know, even an animator taking a physics class is immensely important, because then now not only do you understand the motion of things, you know, visually, but you also understand the physics underneath it. We have an animation student who's literally would write formulas to create the motion that they wanted for overlapping secondary things. They had a character with a tail. In fact, they had two tails, and they were trying to figure out the best way to map out that motion. And because they actually have a computer science background, they literally wrote a function to create the line, and then they followed that line for their motion, and it just sort of grounded in reality that much more. So the more you know about the world, the larger your social circle is, the larger your sphere of understanding about the world, the better person you'll be in general, but the better you'll be able to communicate your ideas and more effectively do the task, do the work of whatever it is you're doing, whether it's writing a program or communicating.
Yes, what I'm hearing is that it is worth it. Even if the first step of jumping into the beach or the water and not knowing if it's going to be warm or cold, it's scary. It sounds like it is worth it. And as we come to a close here, Josh, it's been so lovely to speak with you, and I feel so excited for trying new things and appreciating games more. What do you want people to leave knowing about you and your work, and what are you really looking forward to right now? And that could be another beach night with the family. It could be something related to gaming. It could be anything.
Wow. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing to, I guess, say, learn something about me, or I think just, I don't know, if anybody wants to know anything more, have them reach out and talk to me. As you can obviously tell, I've been talking for, an hour now. I love talking about this stuff. I love sharing my experiences, and honestly, truthfully, like, I really do. I probably should have spent a lot more time asking you questions, because I really do like the dialogue process of things. I think, it's interacting with people, it should be, or I should say, experiencing other people should be interactive. And what I look forward to is just, learning more about the world, learning more about everything. I'm a I guess I'm a compulsive researcher, I guess would be a way to, and a compulsive learner. And so for me, any opportunity I have to learn about something and to dive deep, I spend a lot of time in the wiki hole. I go deeper. I'm clicking links on a Wikipedia article and just keep going deeper.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love that. I'll be happy to have more conversations with you anytime, but I think just the way you've shown up here and your accessibility of you and the information that you have and your willingness to share it speak volumes to who you are as a person, as a teacher, as all the cool things. And if there's going to be a compulsion that we have to have, like, let learning be that compulsion. That sounds pretty good to me. But thank you so much again. I'm really looking
Yeah.
forward to sharing your story, and I hope it gets to touch people in really special ways.
Well, thank you so very, very much. This was really special.